is pretty well known that President George W. Bush owned a baseball team and President Donald Trump liked to unwind on the golf course. In fact, most of the modern U.S. presidents were big sports fans. A new book called Power Players looks at how sports have shaped our presidents and made for some pretty cool moments at the White House. I talked with the author, political commentator, Chris Cillizza.
I cared always about two things more than anything else: politics and sports. And I had spent most of my life writing about politics, and I knew I wanted to write a book that touched on sports. I wasn't sure if I could write a sports-only book.
Right.
But the other thing I really wanted to avoid was writing a book about politics that was a polemic. That was sort of, Democrats are bad for this reason or
Right.
Republicans are bad for that reason. I wanted to write something that a Trump voter would read, a Biden voter would read, or a non-voter would read. I mean, for commercial reasons, because I wanted that to sell as much as possible, but also because that was sort of where my heart was. It took me 3 years to do, but I think the book, there's almost no politics in it, which I know is weird for people when you hear it's a book about the American presidency. But it really is. I tried to keep it narrowly cast on the sports they played, the sports they watched, the sports they loved, and what it tells us about who they are and how they govern.
You say that the president's relationship with sports can be very much a key to understanding who they really are. What do you mean by that?
So I'll give you an example. George Herbert Walker Bush, the elder Bush.
Yes.
He was raised in a family. His mother was a very good tennis player. They played tennis all the time as kids. She was obsessed with team, the importance of a team, the we over the me.
Yes.
That you always, it's not necessarily always about winning. It's about, are you a good teammate? He would sort of come rushing home, as kids, my kids included, do, and say, I got 3 RBIs and 2 hits or whatever in baseball. And she would say, well, how did the team do, George? And I think that carried through his whole life. It actually, Amity, was somewhat detrimental to him as president of the United States because he wasn't good at touting his own accomplishments.
Right.
He didn't toot his own horn enough. He probably should have done it more because post-presidency, his presidency has actually been pretty well reviewed. People have said, well, actually, George H.W. Bush got a lot of stuff done. Yeah. So I do think that sort of how they were taught in sports at a young age and then how they sort of adopted sports in their own lives going forward did have a real impact on how many of them viewed the world. I did 13 presidents from Eisenhower to Biden, and with one exception, Lyndon Johnson, who really didn't care about sports, to be totally candid. They all sort of learned lessons from sports that they brought with them throughout their lives.
Did you have a favorite president and a favorite sport combo?
I think the most revealing one is Richard Nixon in bowling. So when we think of bowling now, we don't think of bowling as like a major sport. But in the late 60s and early 70s, when Richard Nixon was president, bowling was a big deal. The first athlete to be sponsored by a company in the country was a bowler. So Nixon had white lanes built at the White House so that he could bowl. He would go there at 10 or 11 o'clock at night repeatedly throughout the week and bowl, by his own admission, between 7 and 12 games a night. Now, he got to be pretty good. He bowled a 230 at one point, which, 7 strikes and 1. So he was a pretty good bowler. But that image of Nixon sort of bowling frame after frame by himself in the White House, it's what gave him comfort. But he was our loner president, I think, a guy who was uncomfortable with social interaction, was not particularly good at small talk. That image, I think, is stirring and really telling about who he was, both as a president and out of the office.
No, it totally makes sense. So was Nixon the biggest sports fanatic with his bowling, or who was?
So Nixon was definitely the biggest sports fanatic, period. He was someone who was really into baseball, like at an almost uncomfortable level. He would be the guy calling into the sports talk shows now saying, like, well, I've reviewed the stats and I think X player is better than Y player. Like, that was Nixon. I would say the sportiest president, the president who did the most sports well, was probably George Herbert Walker Bush. He played first base at Yale on the Yale baseball team. He was a captain of the team. The best president in terms of athletic accomplishments is Gerald Ford. He was an offensive lineman at the University of Michigan. He was an All-American. He got offers from the Bears and the Detroit Lions to play football after college. So Ford is the best athlete at one thing. Bush is probably the best athlete at a range of things. Nixon may honestly be the worst athlete. Bill Clinton is up there in terms of worst athletes as well. They were not particularly gifted athletes, even though they were involved in athletics, just not particularly good at them.
So we've talked about the fanatics who were the best, but for you, I know as a journalist, you get lost in these things. Who was the most fun to learn about? Like, do you have a favorite story?
So I think my favorite, it's odd because I've spent the last, 8 years of my life covering Donald Trump's, and I thought I knew sort of everything there was to know about Donald Trump before I started this book. I wasn't like, oh yeah, Donald Trump, that's one where I've got a lot of work still to do. No, I thought I knew. But Donald Trump actually played squash in college at Fordham, which is a very random thing. I talked to his biographer, and his biographer said he wasn't particularly good at squash because he didn't have the patience for it. He would just try to ram the ball, which makes a whole lot of sense when you think about his personality.
So I also know that you're a major NBA fan, and here in Seattle, we're a little bit salty about the fact that our team was stolen from us. So in your opinion, which president do we need to recruit into helping bring back our Sonics?
Well, let me say first that I am a partner in arms with you because I grew up in Connecticut, and the Hartford Whalers were the only pro team we had, an NHL team. And they were taken by the Carolina Hurricanes, became the Carolina Hurricanes. So I get it.
Yeah.
I get the pain. I would say Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was, first of all, is still very active, right? You want to pick someone who's alive, ideally. You don't want someone you don't want Dwight Eisenhower, who might have been very convincing, but it's not going to work. So I would pick Bill Clinton, very familiar with touching negotiations, very into sports, and very into basketball. Fun Bill Clinton fact. He once said in an interview, again, not a good athlete. He once said in an interview that he dunked in a high school basketball game, although I could never find evidence of that being the case. But that doesn't derail him as my pick for you guys to get the Sonics back. I think he's right in the right wheelhouse to get it done.
He's the one?
Yes.